Maggie Sullivan woke at 5:30 on a Wednesday morning in October, the same way she had woken every Wednesday for the past 11 years. No alarm. Her body simply knew. 70 years of rising early had written itself into her bones, into the quiet machinery of her sleep, and now, at 95, she no longer fought it. She lay still for a moment in the darkness, listening to the house settle around her, the creak of old wood, the hum of the refrigerator 2 rooms away, the absolute silence of a home that had once been full and was now empty. She reached for the lamp on the nightstand, her hand pale and marked with age spots, and the fine network of veins that no longer hid beneath the skin found the switch. Light filled the small bedroom. Plain walls, a dresser that had been William's, a mirror she rarely looked into anymore. On the wall opposite the bed, a photograph in a simple frame. Maggie and William on their wedding day, 1952. She was 22. He was 24. They were both smiling in that uncertain way people smiled back then, as if happiness were something fragile that might break if you held it too tightly. Maggie sat up slowly, her back protesting in the way it always did now. A dull ache that lived in her lower spine, a reminder that bodies were not made to last this long. She had learned to move carefully, not from fear but from practicality. At 95, a fall was not an inconvenience. It was an ending. She stood, walked to the bathroom, washed her face with cold water, and looked at herself briefly in the mirror. White hair cut short because long hair at her age felt like a pretense. Blue eyes still clear, still steady. A face that had been pretty once and was now simply old. She did not linger. Vanity had died somewhere in her 70s, buried alongside other concerns that no longer seemed to matter. In the kitchen, she made coffee. The same routine. Fill the pot with water. Measure the grounds. 3 scoops, never more, never less. Wait for the machine to gurgle and hiss and produce the bitter black liquid that had been her first ritual of the day for more than 70 years. She poured herself a cup and sat at the small kitchen table, the one William had built in 1965 from oak he had cut himself. His hands had shaped this, sanded it, stained it. She ran her palm across the surface, now feeling the grain, the smoothness he had worked so hard to achieve. Across from her, the chair where William used to sit was empty. It had been empty for 11 years. She had thought in the beginning that she might move it, put it somewhere else, make the kitchen feel less like a place where someone was missing. But she had never done it. The chair stayed, and most mornings she still talked to it. "Wednesday, Bill," she said quietly. Her voice in the empty kitchen sounded small. "Cookville today." The chair did not answer. It never did. But the habit persisted. Some conversations outlasted the people they were meant for. She finished her coffee, washed the cup, set it in the dish rack to dry. Every movement precise. Every action the same as it had been yesterday and the day before that and the day before that. Routine was the architecture that held her life in place. Without it, she feared the whole structure might collapse. At 6:15, she dressed. Dark blue slacks, a white blouse, a gray wool coat that was too warm for October but not warm enough for what was coming. She checked herself in the hallway mirror. Neat, presentable, the way William had always liked her to look. She picked up her purse, a brown leather bag she had owned for 30 years, and walked to the front door. Outside, the sky was the color of old bruises. Low clouds hung heavy over the trees, threatening rain. The maples that lined her driveway had already shed most of their leaves. What remained clung stubbornly to the branches, pale yellow and rust red, trembling in the wind. The air smelled like wet earth and distance. Maggie stood on the porch for a moment, looking out at the road that ran past her house. Millbrook Road. Quiet, empty, the same as always. Her car sat in the driveway, a 2003 Ford Taurus Silver with a small dent in the rear bumper from the time William had backed into the mailbox in 2010. She had never fixed it. The dent was a memory, a small piece of him that still existed in the world. She walked to the car, slowly feeling the cold air work its way through her coat. Her shoes crunched on the gravel. The sound seemed loud in the stillness. She opened the driver's side door and lowered herself carefully into the seat. Her body did not fold the way it used to. Everything required thought now. Effort. She pulled the door shut and sat for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. William had picked this car, the summer before his diagnosis. They had gone to the dealership together and he had walked around this exact model 3 times, checking the tires, opening the hood, running his hand along the hood as if he could feel the quality of the engine through the metal. This one, he had said, this one will last. And it had. 14 years, longer than William. Maggie turned the key. The engine caught immediately a low rumble that settled into a steady hum. She let it warm up for 5 minutes. William had always done that. Let the engine breathe before asking it to work. She had kept the habit, even now. Especially now. At 6:30, she backed out of the driveway and turned onto Millbrook Road. The drive to Cookville was 12 miles. 12 miles of 2-lane country highway that cut through farmland and forest, past houses she had known for decades, and fields that changed with the seasons. She had made this drive every Wednesday for 11 years. Before that, she had made it with William. Before that, when the children were young, she had made it with them in the back seat, arguing over nothing, filling the car with noise. Now the car was silent except for the hum of the tires on asphalt and the occasional creak of the suspension. Maggie drove with both hands on the wheel, her posture straight, her eyes fixed on the road. She was a careful driver, always had been, but at 95 careful had become essential. The sky darkened as she drove. The clouds thickened and pressed lower. By the time she reached Route 70, the first drops of rain had started to fall. Light at first, a spatter on the windshield, then heavier, a steady drumming that built into something more insistent. Maggie turned on the wipers. They scraped across the glass in uneven arcs, leaving streaks she could barely see through. The rain came harder. She slowed down, leaning forward slightly to peer through the windshield. The road ahead blurred into gray. The trees on either side became dark shapes, indistinct and wavering. The wipers beat faster. The rain hammered the roof. And then somewhere between the old grain elevator and the bridge over Falling Water Creek, the car sputtered. Once, twice, a hiccup in the engine's rhythm. Maggie's hands tightened on the wheel. She pressed the gas pedal. Nothing. The engine coughed again, a wet, labored sound, and then it simply stopped. The car coasted forward on momentum, alone the steering, suddenly heavy, the brakes requiring real force to engage. Maggie guided it to the shoulder, the tires crunching over gravel, and brought it to a stop beneath the bare branches of a maple tree. For a moment she sat in the sudden silence. No engine, just the rain. Relentless and loud, pounding the metal roof, streaming down the windows in sheets. She could barely see the road now. Just the vague shapes of trees and the gray wash of rain. She turned the key. The engine clicked. Turned over once. Died. She tried again. Click. Nothing. A third time. The same. Maggie sat back and let her hands drop into her lap. She stared through the windshield at the rain and felt something cold settle in her chest. Not panic. She had lived too long for panic. But something close to it. The awareness that she was 95 years old alone on the side of Route 70 in a car that would not start, with no phone and no way to call for help. She thought about walking. The nearest gas station was 2 miles back toward town. 2 miles in the rain. She looked down at her shoes. Sensible flats not made for walking through mud. She looked at her coat. Already damp from the walk to the car this morning, it would be soaked through in minutes. She thought about waiting. Someone would come eventually, someone would stop. But even as she thought it, she remembered the stretch of road outside her window. Route 70 was not busy on a Wednesday morning, especially not in the rain, especially not this early. She sat for another minute listening to the rain weighing her options, and then she opened the door. The rain hit her immediately, cold and blunt like a hand pressed flat against her face. It soaked through her coat before she had taken 2 steps. She walked to the back of the car, her shoes slipping on the wet gravel, and opened the trunk. Inside, she found an emergency blanket she had never used and a set of jumper cables William had placed there in 2001. Nothing useful. She closed the trunk and stood for a moment, water streaming down her face, dripping from her hair. She walked to the rear bumper and placed both hands on the cold metal just below the trunk lid. She leaned her weight into it. The car did not move. The mud beneath her feet gave way, and she slipped sideways, catching herself against the bumper. She reset her footing, found a patch of gravel that held and pushed again. This time the car moved. Barely. A few inches. But it moved. Maggie set her jaw and kept pushing. The car rolled forward slowly, reluctantly, the tires grinding through the gravel and mud. Maggie's breath came hard and fast. Her hands ached. The cold had already worked its way through her gloves and into her fingers. Her back protested with every step, the dull ache sharpening into something more specific, more insistent. But she kept pushing, 1 step, 2 steps, 3. The first car passed her at 7:52. She saw the headlights approaching through the rain, slowing as they came alongside her. A red SUV, a woman at the wheel. The woman looked at Maggie for 2 full seconds. Their eyes met through the rain-streaked glass. The woman's face registered surprised concern, something that might have been pity, and then she looked back at the road and accelerated. Maggie did not stop pushing. The second car came 10 minutes later, a pickup truck, dark blue, moving slowly. It pulled almost to a stop, the driver leaning forward to peer through the windshield. Maggie could feel him looking at her, calculating, weighing the inconvenience against the obligation. The truck's brake lights glowed red in the rain, and then the truck moved forward and was gone. Maggie kept pushing. The third car was a sedan, silver. It did not even slow down, just passed her in a spray of water and disappeared into the gray curtain of rain. Maggie stopped. She stood with her hands on the bumper, her head down, water pouring off her hair, off her coat, pooling around her feet. She was wet through to the skin now. Her hands had gone from red to white. The pain in her back had spread into her hips, her legs. She had moved the car perhaps 20 feet. The road ahead looked exactly the same. Gray, wet, endless. She lifted her head and looked at her hands. Old hands, wrinkled and spotted and weak, the same hands that had held William's hand the day he died. He had been in the hospital bed, his breathing shallow, his eyes closed. She had sat beside him for hours, holding his hand, feeling the warmth slowly leave his body. And in the last moments when he had opened his eyes one final time, he had looked at her and said, "You're the strongest person I know, Maggie. But strong doesn't mean alone." She had promised him she would not be alone. She had promised she would keep living, keep going, not disappear into the house and become a ghost. And yet here she was, 11 years later, alone on Route 70, pushing a car by herself in the rain. No phone, no one to call, no one who even knew where she was. She closed her eyes and felt something crack inside her chest. Not grief. She had already cried all the tears she had for William. This was something else. The recognition that she had broken her promise, that she had spent 11 years becoming exactly what he had feared she would become. Alone, invisible. A woman whose absence would not be noticed until days had passed. The sound came from the east, low and distant at first, a rumble that was different from the rain, rhythmic, mechanical, growing louder. Maggie opened her eyes but did not turn around. She placed her hands back on the bumper and pushed. Whatever was coming could come. She had work to do. The sound grew, resolved itself into something distinct. Not one engine, but many. Staggered and overlapping, a rolling thunder that filled the air and made the ground hum. Maggie kept pushing. The car moved another few inches. The sound grew louder still, and then it was upon her. Headlights appeared in the rain. Not one or two, but dozens. A line of them spread wide across the lane, floating points of light in the gray. And then the shapes behind the lights materialized. Motorcycles, 40 of them, riding in tight formation through the downpour. The riders hunched forward against the weather, their black leather coats slick with water. Maggie did not turn around. She kept her hands on the bumper and kept pushing. She had not survived 95 years by stopping when things got loud. The motorcycles slowed. The sound of the engines dropped in pitch. And then one by one they pulled to the shoulder ahead of her car and stopped. Maggie kept pushing. She heard a kickstand click down, heard boots hit the gravel, heard footsteps approaching through the rain. She did not look up. "Ma'am," a voice said behind her. Maggie kept pushing. "Ma'am, can I give you a hand?" She stopped then, not because she had given up, but because she had reached the end of a push and needed to reset her grip. She turned her head and looked over her shoulder. A man stood 3 feet behind her, 50-something, tall, broad-shouldered, a beard streaked with gray, tattoos visible on his forearms where his leather jacket ended, rain dripping from his hair. He was looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. Not pity, something else, something like recognition. Behind him, 40 motorcycles idled on the shoulder, 40 men in black leather standing beside their bikes watching. Maggie looked at them for 2 seconds. She took in the leather, the tattoos, the beards the size of them. She had lived long enough to know what the world would call these men. Dangerous, threatening, people to be avoided. She looked at the man standing in front of her. His eyes were steady, patient, waiting. "The car quit on me," she said. Her voice was hoarse from the cold. "I'm trying to get it to flat ground." "Yes, ma'am," the man said. "I can see that. I don't need saving," she said. "I just need to get the car off the road." "That's exactly what we're going to help you do," he said. She looked at him for one more second. Then she stepped aside. The man turned back to the group. "Gary Lou, let's get some guys on this car. We need to push it down to that flat section." He pointed to a stretch of shoulder about 50 yards ahead where the road leveled out near a gravel turnout. "On it," a large man said. He was already off his bike, rolling his shoulders. What happened in the next 4 minutes was something Maggie would think about for a long time afterward. 8 men lined up behind her car without being asked. 4 more went to the sides. A younger man, maybe 27, climbed into the driver's seat to steer. "On 3, the first man said. 1, 2, 3. The car moved. Not inches, but smoothly, steadily. The tires rolled over the wet gravel with a soft crushing sound. The young man steered from the open window, calling out small adjustments. Within 2 minutes, the car was off the road and settled in the gravel turnout beneath a large oak tree. Maggie walked alongside the car the whole time. She did not help push. She had stepped aside for that. But she did not stand back and watch either. She walked with it, one hand trailing lightly along the passenger side, as if she were guiding something that was partly hers and partly the world's. When the car stopped, she walked to the front of it and stood there for a moment looking at it. Then she turned and looked at the line of men behind her. "Well," she said, "that's better." One of the men made a sound that might have been a laugh. The first man walked over to her. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes, the way his jaw was set, the careful way he held himself as if he were trying to take up less space than he actually did. "You got someone we can call for you, ma'am?" he asked. Maggie was quiet for a moment. "My neighbor has a key to the house. I suppose she could call someone." She paused. "I don't have a phone." The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a cell phone. "You can use mine." She looked at the phone for a moment. Then she looked at him with those steady blue eyes. "What's your name?" she asked. "Hank," he said. "Hank Morrison." "Maggie Sullivan," she said, and she held out her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firmer than he expected. The call to Maggie's neighbor, a woman named Linda, took less than 3 minutes. Linda said she would call her nephew Tyler, who had a tow truck and knew something about engines, and that he could be there within the hour. Maggie thanked her and handed the phone back to Hank. The rain had not let up. If anything, it had intensified, turning from a steady downpour into something more deliberate. The drops were fat and close together, drumming hard on the hoods of the motorcycles parked along the shoulder. Hank looked at the sky. He looked at Maggie, who was standing in the rain without appearing to notice it, her gray coat soaked through her white hair, dripping. "Ma'am, you want to sit somewhere while you wait?" he asked. "I'm fine," she said. "You're soaking wet," he said. "So are you," she pointed out. He did not have an answer for that, so he said nothing. A large man appeared at his shoulder, the one Hank had called Gary. He was holding out a folded rain poncho in olive green. Military surplus by the look of it. "Somebody had this in their saddlebag," Gary said. He held it toward Maggie without saying anything else. Maggie looked at the poncho. She looked at Gary, who was 6'4" and 250 pounds, with a scar across his chin and tattoos that disappeared beneath his jacket sleeves. He was holding the poncho carefully, the way you hold something out to someone who might startle. Maggie took it. "Thank you," she said, and she pulled it over her head. It felt her knees enormous on her small frame. The young man who had steered the car made a sound that started as a laugh and turned into a cough when Gary looked at him. But Maggie did not seem bothered. She adjusted the hood over her white hair with the businesslike efficiency of someone who had worn worse things in the worst weather. Then she pulled the olive poncho over her head and held it out toward Gary. "Thank you for this," she said. Gary took it. He looked briefly like he did not know what to do with his hands. That was when the deputy's car appeared. It came from the west, moving slowly, the light bar on its roof throwing blue and red across the wet road. The cruiser pulled to the shoulder 20 feet behind the line of motorcycles and stopped. For a moment, no one moved. The deputy sat in his car, visible through the windshield. 40-something, clean-shaven. His hand rested near the radio mounted on his dashboard. Hank could see him counting. 40 motorcycles, 40 men in black leather, one elderly woman. The deputy's door opened. He stepped out slowly, deliberately. His hand stayed near his belt, near the radio. His eyes moved across the group, assessing. "Everything all right here," he said. His voice was careful, neutral. The voice of someone who had been trained to assess situations before reacting. "Yes, sir," Hank said. "Lady's car broke down. We helped her get it off the road. Her neighbor's nephew is coming with a tow truck." The deputy's eyes moved to Maggie. "Ma'am, you okay?" Maggie looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her posture shifted. Not defensive, but firm, authoritative. The way someone stands when they have had enough of being managed. "Deputy," she said, and her voice had taken on a quality that made everyone pay attention. "I am 95 years old. I have been taking care of myself since before your parents were born. I can tell the difference between people who mean me harm and people who stopped in the rain to help me. These are the latter." The deputy opened his mouth, closed it. "Now," Maggie continued, "if you want to be useful, you could set up some flares behind the car. My neighbor's nephew is coming with a tow truck, and it would be helpful if people could see us from a distance." There was a silence. Lou made a sound that might have been a cough. Gary's shoulders were shaking slightly. The deputy looked at Maggie, at Hank, at the 40 men standing quietly in the rain, and something in his face changed. The calculation shifted. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and he went back to his car for the flares. The flares went down, two of them 30 yards back along the shoulder, their red lights sputtering in the rain. When the deputy walked back, his posture was different, less wary. He stood at a slight distance, but he was listening when Maggie spoke. "You're all going somewhere?" Maggie asked. She was looking at the line of motorcycles, counting them. "Funeral," Hank said, "one of our members. He was from Livingston." Maggie nodded slowly. "I'm sorry," she said. It was not the automatic condolence people produced when they did not know what else to say. It was the kind of sorry that came from someone who had been to enough funerals to understand what they cost. The young man who had steered the car stepped forward. He had dark hair, wet and flat against his head, and he looked young enough that Hank thought of sons and birthdays. "How old are you, if you don't mind my asking?" the young man said. "Lou," Gary said, a warning in his voice. "No, it's fine," Maggie said. She looked at Lou with something that might have been amusement. 95. Lou stared at her. "And you were pushing the car yourself?" I was, she said. In the rain, Lou said. The rain didn't ask my permission, Maggie said. Gary made a sound that was definitely a laugh this time. Even Hank found the corner of his mouth pulling up despite himself. The deputy standing off to the side smiled slightly. Maggie looked at Hank. Your friend, she said. The one you're writing for. What was he like? The question caught Hank off guard. Not because it was strange. It was not. But because most people did not ask it. Most people offered condolences and then moved carefully past the subject. Hank thought for a moment. His name was Dennis, he said. He was loud and stubborn, and he had the worst taste in music I've ever encountered in another human being. He paused. He also drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to help me move into my house when I didn't have anyone else to ask. He did things like that. Maggie nodded. The loud, stubborn ones are often the most reliable, she said. That's been my experience, Hank said. Gary had sat down on the gravel a few feet away, arms on his knees. You live out here by yourself, ma'am, he asked. For 11 years, Maggie said. That's a long time, Gary said. It doesn't feel like it, Maggie said. When you're busy, time moves differently. What keeps you busy? Lou asked. Maggie was quiet for a moment, not the silence of someone who did not have an answer, but of someone deciding how much of one to give. I have a garden, she said. 3 raised beds, tomatoes, green beans, squash. I read. I have a book group on the first Tuesday of the month at the library. There are 4 of us, used to be 12. She paused. I drive to town on Wednesdays. I watch the news, though, less than I used to. Why less? Lou asked. Because at 95, you start to recognize the news, she said. You've seen it before. Different names, same story. There was a silence after that. Not uncomfortable, but the kind that falls when something true has been said and people are quietly agreeing with it. Hank leaned against the front fender of the car. Can I ask you something, he said. You may, Maggie said. The grammatical correction so natural it was not pedantic. Those 3 cars that passed you, he said, before we came along, you saw them. I did. And you just kept pushing. She looked at him. What else would I do? Most people would have stopped, he said, would have waited for someone to stop and help. Maggie considered this. Most people, she said, have not learned yet that waiting for someone else to solve your problem is its own kind of prison. She paused. Although I will admit my back had begun to express some opinions about the situation. The laugh that came from Gary was genuine and loud, and it triggered a ripple through the group, through Lou and the men standing nearby. Even the deputy smiled. It was a good sound, honest. Hank looked at Maggie, at this 95-year-old woman standing in the rain talking about prison and stubborn friends and backs with opinions. And he thought about the 3 cars that had passed her. The red SUV with the woman at the wheel who had made eye contact and looked away. He thought about every time someone had looked at him, at the leather, at the tattoos, at the 40 motorcycles and the roar of the engines, and made a calculation in 2 seconds and come out the wrong side of it. And he thought about this woman who had looked at 40 men in black leather and made a calculation in 2 seconds and stepped aside to let them help. My husband rode, Maggie said suddenly. She was looking at the motorcycles, her eyes moving over them with something like nostalgia. Until he met me. Lou looked up. Why'd he stop? Maggie smiled. It was a small smile, but it reached her eyes. Because I asked, she said. And he loved me more than the road. That's love, Gary said quietly. Yes, Maggie said, it was. Hank felt something shift in his chest. A loosening. He had been riding for 35 years, since he was 19. He had seen accidents and sunrise and storms that had tried to kill him. He had buried friends and said goodbye to people who had mattered. But this moment standing on the side of Route 70, in the rain with a 95-year-old woman and 40 men who had stopped when the world told them to keep going, this felt different. This felt like the kind of moment that divided time into before and after. The sound of a truck coming from the east broke through the moment. A gray F-150 moving slowly, its flashers on. It pulled to the shoulder behind the motorcycles and a man climbed out, 40-something, work boots, a canvas jacket. He walked up with the self-conscious manner of someone arriving late to something he did not fully understand. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, "I'm Linda's nephew, Tyler. I came as fast as I could." "Thank you, Tyler," Maggie said. She peeled herself off the car door with the careful deliberateness of someone managing a body that required management. Tyler moved to steady her, and she let him. Tyler looked at the assembled group, his mouth opened slightly. "They helped me get the car off the road," Maggie said. She said it the way you explain something obvious. Tyler looked at Hank, at Gary, at Lou, at the 40 motorcycles, at the deputy standing nearby. "I appreciate that," he said. Hank nodded. Tyler looked at the engine for about 3 minutes and reported that it appeared to be the alternator. The car was not going anywhere today, but he could tow it back to his shop and have it looked at by Friday. "Friday," Maggie said. She did not say it with distress. She said it with the calm of someone absorbing a logistical complication. "I can take you home now if you want," Tyler said. "The car will be fine here until I can get back with the trailer." Maggie nodded. She reached into the car for her purse and her library book, a worn hardcover with a blue spine, and she straightened up and turned to face the group. 40 men looked at her, plus Tyler, plus the deputy. She took her time. She looked across the line of them slowly the way you look at something you want to remember. "Thank you," she said to the group as a whole, "for stopping." She paused, "and for not making a fuss about it." Before she got into Tyler's truck, the deputy walked over to Hank. "You boys take care," he said. "Not a warning. Something miles in one. Recognition, maybe." "Yes, sir," Hank said. Hank watched Tyler's truck pull out onto Route 70 and head west toward Cookville until the taillights disappeared into the gray curtain of rain. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Gary said, "We should get going. We're already behind." "Yeah," Hank said. They began the process of mounting up. Helmets going on, engines turning over. The sequence of sounds that Hank had heard 1,000 times. The mechanical ritual that meant the road again. Hank put his own helmet on and swung onto his bike. He sat for a moment before starting it. He was thinking about something Maggie had said. Not any particular line, the whole of it. The way she had stood in the rain and kept pushing. The way she had looked at 40 men in black leather and made a calculation in 2 seconds and stepped aside to let them help. Not because she was helpless, not because she had stopped being cautious, but because she had looked and she had seen and she had decided. He thought about the 3 cars that had passed her and kept going. The red SUV with the woman at the wheel who had made eye contact and looked away. He started the engine. Behind him, the formation came to life. 39 engines joining his. The combined sound rising over the wet road, filling the space under the gray sky. Hank looked at the Taurus one more time sitting under the oak tree. He thought about a woman who planted tomatoes and green beans and squash in 3 raised beds, who watched less news because she had seen enough to recognize the pattern, who had pushed a car alone in the rain at the age of 95, not out of bravado, but simply because it was the only thing to do. He put the bike in gear and pulled on to Route 70. The formation followed. 40 motorcycles rolling east through the rain, toward Livingston, toward a funeral, toward whatever came next. But something had changed, something small and significant, something that none of them could have named, but all of them felt. They had stopped when 3 others had not, and a 95-year-old woman had let them, and the world had not ended, and no category had held. The funeral service for Dennis Whitkin was held at 2 o'clock that afternoon at Mount Oliver Baptist Church in Livingston, Tennessee. 90 people attended. The pastor, who'd been warned the bikers were coming and had prepared himself, found that no preparation had been necessary. They sat in the pews in their leather, quiet and reverent, and when Dennis's daughter, Sarah, spoke for 8 minutes about her father's laugh and the time he drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to help someone move, Hank Morrison sat in the 3rd row and let the tears come. Afterwards, standing in the parking lot in the thin afternoon light that had finally broken through after the rain, Lou came to stand beside him. "You think she's okay," Lou said. "The old lady." "Maggie," Hank said. Maggie, Lou said. You think she's okay? I think she's fine, Hank said. He thought about it. I think she's been fine through worse things than a broken alternator. Lou was quiet for a moment, rolling his helmet in his hands. She didn't know who we were, he said. I mean, she didn't care. She knew, Hank said. Then she didn't care, Lou said. She looked, Hank said. She looked and she saw what was actually there. Lou thought about that. How do you get like that, he said. That old without being afraid of everything. Hank thought about it for longer than the question probably required. I think you get there by deciding, he said finally. Not once, every day. That night, Hank lay awake in a motel room outside of Cookville and thought about a 95-year-old woman pushing a car alone in the rain, about 3 cars that had passed her, about the way she had looked at 40 men in black leather and made a calculation that most people would not have made. He thought about Dennis, who was loud and stubborn and gone, about the specific way grief worked itself into your body and stayed there, a permanent guest you learned to live with but never truly welcomed. And he thought about something Maggie had said, about waiting for someone else to solve your problem being its own kind of prison, about backs with opinions, about rain that did not ask permission. At 9 the next morning, he was sitting in his truck in the parking lot of the pharmacy on Spring Street when Tyler's gray F-150 pulled in. The passenger door opened and Maggie stepped out. She was wearing a different coat today, dark blue, and she moved with the same deliberate care, one hand on the door until she was steady. Tyler said something to her through the window. She nodded and he drove off. She turned toward the pharmacy and she saw Hank. She looked at him for a moment, the same 2-second calculation. Then she walked over. Mr. Morrison, she said. Mrs. Sullivan, he said. I was just passing through. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had been alive long enough to identify a polite lie at 50 paces, but who had decided to allow it. There's a gas station next door, she said. They have terrible coffee. That sounds about right, he said. I usually sit there for 20 minutes on Wednesdays, she said, to watch the town wake up. I've got 20 minutes, he said, so they did that. They sat in the parking lot of the gas station next to the Piggly Wiggly on Spring Street in Cookville, Tennessee, with terrible coffee in paper cups, watching the town wake up. A delivery truck pulled into the Piggly Wiggly. A school bus moved through the far side of the lot. 2 women in scrubs walked fast from the direction of the medical office across the street. A regular Wednesday in a regular town, unremarkable from the outside. Your husband, Hank said. You said he rode. Maggie wrapped both hands around her paper cup. William, she said. He rode a 1962 Harley, black with chrome. He loved that bike more than anything. She paused. Until he loved me more. How long were you married? 61 years, Maggie said. We met in 1951. Married in 52. He died in 2013. She said it matter-of-factly, the way you state information that has been true for so long, it no longer carries the weight it once did. That's a long time, Hank said. Not long enough, Maggie said. It's never long enough. They were quiet for a moment. The coffee was bad, bitter and weak at the same time, as if the gas station had found a way to fail in both directions simultaneously. But neither of them complained. People decide things about you before they see you, Hank said. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the parking lot, at the morning unfolding in its ordinary way. They see the leather, the bikes, the tattoos, and they cross the street. Yes, Maggie said, they do. Doesn't bother you, he said. The way people decide things about you, old woman alone out on the road? Maggie was quiet for a moment. It used to, she said. When I was younger, I wanted very much to be seen accurately. I thought it was something I could earn somehow. That if I behaved correctly or explained myself clearly enough, people would see what was actually there. She paused. I don't think that anymore. What do you think now? He asked. I think the people who actually see you are worth more than any number who don't, she said. Yesterday, 40 strangers stopped in the rain and helped me move my car. Not because they knew who I was, because they looked. She turned her head and looked at him directly. That's enough for me. Hank sat with that for a moment. He thought about restaurants that went quiet when his group walked in, about parents who picked up children and moved to the other side of the street, about the deputy yesterday who had sat in his car running the numbers before deciding whether to get out. I'm going to give you my number, Hank said. My actual number, not a club number. Mine. He pulled out his phone. In case the car gives you trouble again, he said. Maggie looked at him. I don't have a phone, she said. Then get one, he said. A simple one. I'll show you how to use it. She looked at him for a long moment. Why, she said. Why do you care? Hank thought about how to answer that. About Dennis, who had driven 4 hours in a snowstorm. About the specific loneliness of being misread by people who had already decided what you were. About a 95-year-old woman who had kept pushing when 3 cars had passed her by. Because 3 cars didn't stop, he said finally, and that's not the world I want to live in. Maggie held his gaze. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad and a pen. All right, she said, give me your number. He recited it. She wrote it down in careful script, her handwriting neat and precise despite the age in her hands. When she was done, she tore the page out and folded it once and put it in the pocket of her blue coat. Thank you, she said. When Tyler came back to pick her up at 10, Maggie was standing outside the pharmacy with her prescriptions and her groceries in a paper bag. She watched Hank's truck pull out of the parking lot and onto Spring Street. Watched it until it turned onto the main road and the sound faded into the general noise of the morning. Then she got in Tyler's truck and said, "Thank you, Tyler," and they drove home in the thin October sunlight, the road dry and clear after the rain. That night, Maggie sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and the piece of paper with Hank Morrison's phone number on it. She unfolded it and looked at the numbers. 10 digits, a direct line to someone who had stopped when others had not. She thought about William, about the promise she had made to him in the hospital. Don't become a ghost in that house. Don't disappear. She thought about the library group that had once been 12 people and was now just her. About the Wednesday drives to Cookville that were the only thing that pulled her out of the house. About the garden that she tended, not because she loved gardening, but because it gave her something to do with her hands. She thought about 3 cars passing her in the rain. About the way no one had stopped. About the specific kind of invisibility that came with being old. And then she thought about 40 motorcycles that had stopped. About a man named Hank Morrison who had asked her what Dennis was like. About the way they had pushed her car without making her feel small. About the way they had seen her. She folded the paper again and put it back in her pocket. 1 week later, on a Tuesday evening, Tyler knocked on her door. He was holding a small box. "This came for you," he said. He looked a little baffled. "Guy called me, said to make sure you knew how to answer calls." Maggie took the box. Inside was a phone. Simple, basic, nothing elaborate, with one contact already saved in it. Hank Morrison. There was a note, plain paper, plain handwriting. "In case you want to stop being alone. H." Maggie stood in her doorway holding the phone. Tyler was saying something about the guy being very direct, very specific about making sure she understood how it worked. But Maggie was not listening. She was looking at the phone in her hands, at the single contact saved in its memory. She thought about being alone, about the specific architecture of loneliness that she had built around herself over 11 years, room by room, day by day, a structure so familiar now that she barely noticed it anymore. She thought about William's voice in the hospital. "Promise me you won't disappear." She looked up at Tyler. "Can you show me how it works?" she said. It took 10 minutes. Tyler was patient. He showed her how to turn it on, how to answer a call, how to type a message, though she laughed at the tiny keyboard and said, "This is ridiculous." When he left, Maggie sat at the kitchen table with the phone in front of her. She stared at it for a long time. Then she picked it up, opened the message screen, typed slowly, carefully, one letter at a time. "Thank you." She hit send before she could change her mind. The response came 2 minutes later. "You're welcome. How's the car?" Maggie smiled. She typed back even slower this time. "Running. Tyler fixed it Friday." "Good. Wednesday drive still on?" She paused, thought about it, typed yes. "Be safe out there." Maggie set the phone down. She looked at the empty chair across from her, the one William used to sit in. "I'm trying, Bill," she said quietly. "I'm trying." The next Wednesday, Maggie made her drive to Cookville. The car ran fine, no problems. She picked up her prescriptions, bought her groceries, sat in the gas station parking lot with terrible coffee, and watched the town wake up. Her phone buzzed. She pulled it out, looked at the screen. "Everything okay?" She typed back, "Yes," sitting at the gas station. "Good coffee, terrible, the best kind." Maggie smiled. She looked out at the parking lot, at the ordinary Wednesday unfolding, at the world moving forward the way it always did. But something had shifted, something small but significant. She was not alone. 2 weeks after that, Hank Morrison pulled into Cookville on a Thursday, not passing through this time, coming specifically. He texted Maggie first. "In town for a few hours, coffee." She texted back, "Gas station, 20 minutes. They sat in the same spot, same terrible coffee, same parking lot, but the conversation went deeper. "I had a son," Hank said. He had not planned to say it, but it came out anyway. "Michael, he died 8 years ago, hit and run. Driver was never found." Maggie looked at him, said nothing, waited. "He was 16, Hank continued. "We'd had a fight the morning he died. About college, about his future. Stupid stuff. The last thing I said to him was that he needed to take things more seriously." He paused. "I never got to tell him I was proud of him." "He knew," Maggie said quietly. "How do you know that?" "Because sons always know," she said. "Even when we don't say it, they know." Hank was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Dennis, the man we buried, he saved my life. 2 years after Michael died, I was going to end it. Had the gun, had the note. Dennis broke down my door at 2 in the morning. Sat with me until the sun came up." He looked at Maggie. "That's why we stopped for you. Because Dennis taught us to stop." Maggie reached across the space between them and put her hand on his arm. Just for a moment. "I'm glad he did," she said. They sat in silence after that. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that falls between people who have said true things to each other and don't need to fill the space with noise. "I had a daughter," Maggie said finally. Her voice was so quiet, Hank almost missed it. "Sarah. She died when she was 6 months old. 1953. Hank looked at her, waited. "Sudden infant death," Maggie said. "They called it crib death back then. We put her down for a nap, and when I went to check on her an hour later, she was gone." She stared at her coffee cup. "William and I barely survived it. Our marriage, our lives, everything broke that day." "How did you put it back together?" Hank asked. "We didn't," Maggie said. "Not really, we just learned to live with the broken pieces. We had other children later, 2 sons, but there was always a space where Sarah should have been." She paused. "When William died, I thought I have lost everyone. Why open my heart again?" "What changed?" Hank asked. Maggie looked at him. 40 strangers who stopped in the rain," she said. "Who didn't make me feel small, who just made the car lighter." Hank felt something crack in his chest, not breaking. Opening. "You want to know the truth," Maggie said. She was still looking at him, those steady blue eyes holding his. "Some days I push that car because it's the only thing that still needs me. The garden grows whether I tend it or not. The house is clean because there's no one to make it dirty. The library group is just me now, and I keep showing up because if I don't, it means admitting that it's over, that I'm the last one left." She took a breath. "William made me promise the day he died that I wouldn't disappear, that I wouldn't become a ghost in our house, and I promised him I wouldn't." Her voice cracked slightly. "But I broke that promise. For 11 years, I broke it every single day." "You're not a ghost," Hank said. "No," Maggie said. "Not anymore, because 40 people stopped, and one of them gave me a phone. And now on Wednesdays, someone checks to make sure I'm okay. And that's more than I've had in 11 years." Hank reached across and took her hand. Not romantically, but the way you hold on to something precious and fragile. You're not alone, Maggie. No, she said, I'm not. They sat like that for a moment. Two people who had lost things, who had survived things, who had found each other on the side of a highway in the rain and recognized something in each other that the world did not see. When Tyler came to pick Maggie up, Hank walked her to the truck. He opened the door for her, made sure she was settled. Same time next week, he said. Yes, Maggie said, and then quieter. Thank you, Hank, for stopping, for seeing me. Thank you for letting us, he said. That night, Maggie sat at her kitchen table and looked at her phone, at the contact list that had grown. Hank Morrison, Linda, Tyler, the library had given her the new coordinator's number. The community center where she sometimes volunteered, 5 numbers, 5 connections, 5 threads that tied her back to the world. She opened her messages, typed to Hank, I've been thinking about what you said, about Dennis teaching you to stop, about your son. The response came quickly, yeah. She typed, I think William would have liked you. I think he would have liked all of you. I would have liked to meet him. Maggie smiled. She set the phone down and looked at the empty chair across from her. I'm keeping the promise now, Bill, she said to the silence. I'm opening the door. It's scary as hell, but I'm doing it. The chair, as always, did not answer. But for the first time in 11 years, Maggie did not feel like she was talking to herself. 3 weeks passed, then 4, then 6. October turned to November. The maples along Millbrook Road shed the last of their leaves and stood bare against the gray sky. The mornings came colder. Frost appeared on Maggie's windshield on Wednesday mornings, and she had to run the defroster for 10 minutes before the glass cleared enough to see through. But she kept driving every Wednesday, same time, same route, same stops. The difference was the phone. It sat on her kitchen counter now, next to the coffee maker. A small black rectangle that connected her to a world she had spent 11 years avoiding. Some mornings she would stand there with her coffee and just look at it, marveling at the strangeness of it. That something so small could make her feel so much less alone. Hank texted every Wednesday morning. Always the same time, 7:15. Right when he knew she would be getting ready to leave. Road clear. And she would text back slower than he did, her fingers still clumsy on the small keyboard. Yes, leaving now. Be safe. Always. It became a ritual, as fixed and necessary as the coffee, as the drive itself. But it was not just Hank. Linda had started calling on Sunday evenings, just to check in, she said, just to see if Maggie needed anything from town. Tyler texted occasionally with updates about the car, small things, ordinary things, the kind of things that meant someone was thinking about you. And slowly, carefully, like a houseplant that had been kept in the dark for too long and was now being moved toward the light, Maggie began to open. It started small. At the library on the first Tuesday in November, Maggie mentioned to Carol, the librarian, that the book group used to have 12 members. What happened to them? Carol asked. They moved away, or got sick, or died, Maggie said. Now it's just me. Carol was quiet for a moment, then she said, would you mind if I mentioned it in the newsletter that you're looking for new members? Maggie hesitated. The group had been hers and William's. They had started it together in 2003. Letting new people in felt like diluting something precious. But she thought about the promise she had made, about not disappearing, about opening the door. Yes, she said, you can mention it. The following Tuesday, 3 people showed up. 2 women in their 70s and a man in his 80s who walked with a cane and had opinions about everything. They sat in the small meeting room at the library and talked about the book, a mystery novel none of them had particularly enjoyed. And when the hour was over, all 3 of them said they would come back. Maggie walked to her car that afternoon feeling something she had not felt in a very long time. Not happiness exactly, but something close to it. A lightness. A sense that the world was not as small as she had made it. She texted Hank when she got home. Library Grow Up has 4 people now. The response came immediately. That's good, Maggie. Really good. She stared at the message for a long time. Then she typed, thank you for the phone. You're welcome. You using it okay? Yes, still slow, but I'm learning. You're doing great. Maggie set the phone down and looked at the empty chair across from her. You were right, Bill, she said quietly, about not being alone. You were right. In December, the community center called. They had heard through Linda that Maggie had learned to use a smartphone. They were starting a class for seniors who wanted to learn technology. Would she be interested in helping? Maggie's first instinct was to say no. She barely knew how to use the thing herself. But then she thought about Tyler standing in her kitchen, patiently showing her how to answer a call. About Hank sending her messages every Wednesday. About the specific gift of someone taking the time to teach you something. Yes, she said, I can help. The class met on Thursday afternoons. 6 people the first week, 12 the second. By the third week, they had to move to a larger room. Maggie sat with people her own age and older and showed them how to send messages, how to save contacts, how to take a photograph. Small things that felt enormous when you were learning them for the first time. And something happened that Maggie had not expected. The people she taught started coming back, not just for the class, but to talk, to ask questions, to sit with her for a few minutes before or after and share stories about grandchildren they could not visit, children who lived too far away, spouses who were gone. She became, without meaning to, a kind of anchor, someone who understood, who had been where they were, who knew what it meant to be old and alone and afraid that the world had moved on without you. One Thursday in January, a woman named Patricia, 78 years old and recently widowed, sat with Maggie after class and cried. Not quietly, but the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deep and does not stop easily. I don't know how to do this, Patricia said. Any of this, the phone, the house, being by myself, I don't know how. Maggie put her hand on Patricia's arm and waited until the crying slowed. You learn, she said, one day at a time, one small thing at a time. But what if I can't? You can, Maggie said. I know you can, because I did. And I'm 95 and stubborn as hell, but I learned. Patricia laughed through her tears. How long does it take? Maggie thought about that. About 11 years of isolation, about a car broken down in the rain, about 40 strangers who stopped. As long as it takes, she said, and then one day you'll realize you're not just surviving anymore, you're living. When Patricia left, Maggie sat alone in the empty community center room and felt something settle in her chest. Not grief, not loneliness, but purpose, the specific weight of being needed. She texted Hank that night. I think I'm helping people. I know you are. It feels good. It should. You're good at it. Maggie stared at the message. Then she typed, I want to tell you something. I'm listening. She paused. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she typed slowly and carefully. When William died, I thought that was it. That I had used up all my chances to matter. That I would just live out whatever time I had left and then disappear and no one would notice. She hit send, waited. The 3 dots appeared indicating he was typing. I would have noticed. Maggie's eyes burned. She typed, you didn't know me then. I know you now, and you matter, Maggie. To me, to those people at the community center, to the library group, you matter. She set the phone down because her hands were shaking. She looked at the empty chair, at the kitchen that had been so quiet for so long, and she let herself cry. Not from sadness, but from the specific relief of being seen. February came, then March. The frost gave way to rain. The bare trees began to bud. Maggie's garden, which she had neglected the previous year, got tended properly. She planted tomatoes and green beans and squash in the 3 raised beds the same way she had done for 40 years. But this time she did not do it alone. Patricia came over one Saturday with gloves and a trowel, and they worked side by side, not talking much, just digging in the soil and placing seeds and covering them over. My husband used to do this with me, Patricia said, every spring. So did mine, Maggie said. They worked in silence after that, a comfortable silence, the kind that did not need filling. The library group grew to 8 people. They met every first Tuesday and argued about books and drank terrible coffee from the library's ancient coffee maker and laughed more than they probably should have in a library. Maggie found herself looking forward to it, not out of obligation, but because she genuinely wanted to be there. The phone class expanded to twice a week. Maggie brought in Lou, the young biker, to help with the more technical questions. He showed up in his leather vest and tattoos and immediately charmed every person in the room with his patience and his willingness to explain things 17 times if necessary. "You're good at this," Maggie told him one afternoon. "My grandma had a stroke last year," Lou said. "Lost her speech. I taught her to text so she could still talk to us." He paused. "She died in November, but those last 6 months we got to talk, really talk, because of the phone." Maggie looked at him. "I'm sorry about your grandmother." "Me too," Lou said, "but I'm glad we had that time, and I'm glad I can help other people have it too." Hank came to Cookville every other Wednesday now, not passing through, coming specifically. They had coffee at the gas station, and the terrible coffee became a kind of private joke between them. They brought their own travel mugs, eventually filled with better coffee from Maggie's kitchen, but they still sat in the gas station parking lot because it had become their place. They talked about everything, about Dennis and Michael and Sarah and William, about the specific architecture of grief and how it changed shape over time but never truly left, about aging and relevance and what you leave behind when you go. "I'm 54, Hank said one Wednesday in March. "I've been writing since I was 19, and I'm starting to think about what comes after." "After what?" Maggie asked. "After the bikes, after the road. When I'm too old to ride anymore, what do I do? Who am I?" Maggie thought about that. "You're whoever you decide to be," she said. "Age doesn't take that away. It just changes the options." "What are you now?" Hank asked. "At 95, who are you?" Maggie smiled. "I'm still figuring that out." In April, on a Wednesday morning that smelled like rain, Maggie was driving to Cookville when the car made a sound. Not the catastrophic failure of 6 months ago, but a grinding, uncertain noise that came from somewhere under the hood. She slowed down. The noise continued. She pulled to the shoulder, the same stretch of Route 70 where she had broken down before, and turned off the engine. She sat for a moment listening to the silence. Then she reached for her phone. It rang twice before Hank answered. "Maggie, everything okay?" "Car's making a noise," she said. "I pulled over." "Where are you, Bao?" "Route 70, near Falling Water Creek." "I'm 20 minutes out. Can you wait?" Maggie looked at the road, at the trees budding green, at the sky that was gray but not threatening. "Yes," she said. "I can wait. I'm on my way." She hung up and sat in the car. But this time she did not feel the cold panic of 6 months ago. This time she felt calm, because she had called someone, because someone was coming, because she was not alone. She got out of the car and looked under the hood, even though she had no idea what she was looking at. Belts and hoses and metal. It all looked the same to her. She closed the hood and leaned against the car and waited. Hank arrived in 17 minutes. Not on his motorcycle, but in his truck. He pulled up behind her and got out, walking over with the easy confidence of someone who knew engines. "Let's take a look," he said. He opened the hood, poked around, made a thoughtful sound. "Belt's loose," he said. "Not a big deal. I can tighten it here, but you should get it looked at properly." "I will," Maggie said. He worked for about 10 minutes using tools from a kit in his truck. When he was done, he closed the hood and wiped his hands on a rag. "That should hold you," he said. "But seriously, get Tyler to check it." "I will," Maggie said again. They stood there for a moment. The road was empty, the morning quiet except for the birds and the wind in the trees. "Thank you for coming," Maggie said. "Of course," Hank said. "I mean it," Maggie said. 6 months ago, I would have tried to push this car myself, or walked, or just sat here and hoped someone stopped." She paused. But I called you and you came. And that's different. Hank looked at her. You know what I learned, Maggie? What? That stopping for someone isn't weakness. It's not charity. It's just what people are supposed to do for each other. And asking for help isn't giving up. It's just being smart enough to know you don't have to do everything alone. When did you learn that? Maggie asked. The day I met a 95-year-old woman pushing a car in the rain, Hank said. Maggie smiled. You want terrible coffee? Always. They drove separately to the gas station in Cookville, parked next to each other, got coffee that was as predicted terrible, and sat in the parking lot watching the town wake up. I've been thinking, Maggie said, about, about what you said, about what comes after the road. Hank waited. I think the road doesn't end, Maggie said. It just changes. You stop riding motorcycles and you start doing something else. But you're still moving forward. You're still going somewhere. Where are you going? Hank asked. Maggie looked out at the parking lot, at the ordinary Wednesday unfolding. I don't know, she said, but I'm not standing still anymore. And that's enough. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Hank said, you know what I'm grateful for? What? That 3 cars passed you, he said, because if they hadn't, we wouldn't have stopped. And I wouldn't be sitting here right now drinking terrible coffee with the most stubborn woman I've ever met. Maggie laughed. The rain didn't ask my permission that day. No, Hank said, and neither did I. No, Maggie agreed, you didn't. You just stopped and helped and gave me a phone and kept showing up every Wednesday whether I wanted you to or not. Did you want me to? Hank asked. Maggie turned and looked at him. Yes, she said. I just didn't know it yet. 6 months after the morning on Route 70, Maggie stood in her kitchen and looked at her phone. The contact list had grown. Hank, Linda, Tyler, Carol from the library, Patricia, Lou, the community center. The book group chat that someone had started and that she still did not entirely understand but checked every day anyway. 23 contacts, 23 connections, 23 threads that tied her to a world that had once seemed impossibly distant. She opened her messages and typed to Hank. Thank you. The response came immediately. For what? For stopping, for seeing me, for not letting me disappear. You were never going to disappear, Maggie. You're too stubborn for that. She smiled. Type maybe, but I needed someone to remind me. Any time. She set the phone down and looked at the empty chair across from her, the chair where William used to sit, where she had spent 11 years directing one-sided conversations into the silence. I kept the promise, Bill, she said. It took me a long time. 11 years too long, but I kept it. The chair did not answer, but Maggie did not need it to. She picked up her phone and typed to the book group chat. Who's hosting next month? The responses came quickly. Patricia volunteered. Someone suggested a different book. Someone else made a joke about Carol's terrible coffee. The chat lit up with messages, and Maggie read them all smiling. Then she opened a new message to Hank. You still coming Wednesday? Always? Why, ma'am? I want you to meet the book group and the phone class people. They keep asking about the biker who gave me the phone. You told them about that? I tell everyone about that. There was a pause, then, I'd like that, meeting them. Good. 2 p.m. at the library. Don't be late. I won't. Maggie set the phone down and walked to the window. Outside, the April sun was breaking through the clouds. The garden was starting to grow. Green shoots pushing up through the soil, tomatoes and beans and squash. The same thing she had planted for 40 years. But this time she could see them. This time she was not just going through the motions. She was living. That Wednesday, Maggie drove to Cookville. The car ran fine. Tyler had tightened the belt and checked everything else and declared it good for another year at least. The drive was familiar now, comforting. The same roads, the same trees, the same sky, but everything was different. At the library, Hank showed up at exactly 2 o'clock. He walked in wearing jeans and a button-down shirt, looking uncertain in a way Maggie had never seen him. The book group was already there. 8 people ranging in age from 68 to 91, they all looking at this tall, tattooed man with open curiosity. "Everyone," Maggie said, "this is Hank Morrison. He's the one I told you about." Patricia stood up and walked over and shook Hank's hand. "Thank you," she said simply, "for stopping." And then everyone else stood up. And one by one, they shook his hand and thanked him. Not effusively, not making a big deal of it, just acknowledging that he had done something that mattered. Hank looked overwhelmed. He glanced at Maggie and she smiled. After the book group, they had coffee. Real coffee this time from the new cafe that had opened on Spring Street. They sat outside in the April sunshine and Hank told her about the ride he was planning for the summer. A memorial ride for Dennis. 40 bikes, a route through Tennessee and Kentucky. "You should come," he said. Maggie laughed. "I'm 95 years old." "So you rode before?" "That was 60 years ago." "The bike doesn't care how old you are." Maggie thought about that, about William teaching her to ride in 1960, about the feel of the wind and the road and the freedom, about being young and fearless and alive. "Maybe," she said. "I'll take that as a yes," Hank said. They sat in the sunshine and drank good coffee and watched the world move around them. And Maggie thought about everything that had changed in 6 months, about 40 motorcycles in the rain, about a phone that connected her to people who cared, about a promise she had finally kept. "You know what I learned?" she said. "What's that?" Hank asked. "The rain didn't ask my permission that day, and neither did you. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we don't choose alone." Hank smiled. "Sometimes the best things choose us." "Yes," Maggie said, "sometimes they do." They finished their coffee and walked back to their cars. Hank opened Maggie's door for her, made sure she was settled. "Same time next week," he said. "Yes," Maggie said, "but come to the house first. I want to show you the garden." "I'd like that." He closed her door and stepped back. Maggie started the engine. It caught immediately, smooth and reliable. She looked at Hank through the window and he waved. She waved back. Then she pulled out onto Spring Street and drove home. The house on Millbrook Road was not empty anymore. Not really. It still had the same rooms, the same furniture, the same empty chair at the kitchen table. But it was not a tomb. It was a home, a place where someone lived, where someone was learning to live again. Maggie walked inside and set her purse on the counter next to her phone, but the phone buzzed. A message from Patricia about the garden. Another from Lou about next week's class. Another from the book group chat about the new member who wanted to join. She read them all, responded to each one, and then she made herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table. She pulled out her phone one more time and opened a new message. To no one, just to herself. A note she would save and never send but needed to write. "I'm 95 years old. I spent 11 years alone. And then 40 strangers stopped in the rain and everything changed. I learned to ask for help. I learned that being seen is a gift. I learned that the world doesn't end when you open the door. It just gets bigger." She saved the message, put the phone down, and then she looked at the empty chair across from her and said, "I did it, Bill. I'm not a ghost anymore." Outside, the April evening settled over Millbrook Road. The trees budded green. The garden grew. The world turned the way it always did. And inside the house, Maggie Sullivan sat at her kitchen table and felt for the first time in 11 years completely and utterly alive.